I think that there's a lot of reasons why people don't speak up, and maybe first and foremost is that there's really a taboo about it. And so when people speak up, if it's a victim who's speaking up, then very often that person is blamed. And they're asked, kind of what are they doing wrong to, what did they do wrong that led them to be abused, that led them to be beat up or mistreated, and they're basically blamed for the abuse.
There's many factors. Some of it, the stigma of divorce, especially women. It's very hard for a Muslim woman who divorced or immigrant woman, let's say that could be Muslim and not Muslim, get remarried. Because in Middle East and subcontinent and Asian culture, divorce is not something that a woman would like to have. No one would like to be divorced, but especially a woman, it becomes very difficult for her because there's a stigma about divorce.
I'll talk a little bit about immigrant women, for example. An immigrant woman may have her status to remain in the United States may be dependent on her partner. So if she were to report abuse and someone were to advise her to leave her partner, she may not be left with a viable option to remain in the United States. She may also not have a visa that allows her to work, have a working permit, for example. If you don't have a work permit and you're leaving your partner and you may not be in status anymore, you can't work, you can't support yourself. And so financially, you're really not in a good position. And that is one of the major reasons why people fail to report being in an abusive situation.
There's economic reason. A woman very much dependent on the man for financial support. For she's worried, if I to leave the relationship, how I'm gonna provide for myself, and how am I going to provide for my children?
There's also a fear that people won't believe you. So, particularly if the perpetrator is somebody who's well known in the community or who has a good relationship with the Imam or maybe is a funder to Islamic organizations, then the victim of the abuse is often going to feel like, who's going to believe me? This guy prays in the masjid, he's well known, nobody's going to believe that it's happening to me.
One of the many very, very common issues that we see in domestic violence situations is that the partner that is being abused is isolated. So if they are isolated from their community, they may not, or friends or family, they may not know who to speak with. They may not have access to justice. So they may not want to tell friends, they may not want to tell religious leaders or other people in their religious communities for fear that they are judged, for fear that they may not be able to get help.
And then, quite honestly, there aren't really a lot of great options. So once you talk about it, then the response that people have, it can make you feel even worse. So I think that if people choose to talk to their Imam, if the Imam is not trained, the Imam might say, okay, you just need to be patient, you need to pray more, trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And a person could be in a very dangerous situation where they're being injured, where they're being, psychologically demoralized and even spiritually, affected, impacted. So knowing that people might get a negative response is also a deterrent. And then honestly, it's not a great option to leave, right? It's the being abused is very difficult and painful and awful, and nobody should have to endure it. And if you end a marriage and if, let's say, you're a single mom, that's also very difficult. The legal path is quite challenging. Living on your own is quite challenging. It's like another difficult situation. It's not like you leave one bad thing for a great option. So the options are challenging. It
is misunderstood Islamically that divorce is discouraged. So it is true that marriage is given a very high station in Islam. Marriage is a sacred covenant between two parties and God. And it is absolutely the cornerstone of our communities to have healthy marriages, have healthy families.
Islam is a very practical religion. And when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about marriage and divorce, he says, imsak bima'ruf aw tasrih bi ihsan. Culturally, we have a lot of stigma around divorce, and culturally, we highly discourage divorce. But the Quran presents divorce as a viable option, and not only in cases of abuse, but in any case where a couple can't live together, upholding the principles of mawadda and rahma, that love and mercy, mutual respect.
Many people quote the hadith that the most hated things in the eyes of God, permissible hated things in the eyes of God, is divorce. The hadith is not authentic. There's no such a thing. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made the divorce lawful. You cannot hate something and make it lawful. That's why the hadith is not authentic.
I think that importance that is given to marriage should be completely separated from the topic of domestic violence and abuse. And I say that because the Quran is very clear about what a marital relationship should be. It is, interestingly, the word that they use is Sakinah, that it should be a relationship of mercy, of tranquility, that marriage is supposed to be something that gives you joy and security. And that norm, that really high platform that marriage is given in Islam, is not seen in an abusive situation. And so you can't apply the regular rules.
So if people are mistreating each other, or if one person is mistreating the other, then certainly divorce could be not only a legitimate option, but a really great option that could lead to peace and reinstating those principles that a family should have, which are peace and sakina in the home. So if there's no sakina because of abuse, and sakina could be achieved by separating from the abusive person, then it's actually, I think, not only an acceptable option, but I think that it could be a recommended option.
We encourage people to be married and to stay married. That's why if they have problems that can be resolved, we encourage them to come for counseling, do their best to learn conflict resolution. We do premarital counseling. We want people to have healthy marriage. We don't like them to end up in divorce at all. But if a woman is in an abusive relationship, where the husband physically abusive, where the husband in an abusive relationship that is not sustainable, then we tell them this marriage already have been violated. The vow have been broken, the marriage vows. If people break the marriage vows and the principles of the marriage contract and the strong covenant and the pledge have given, as Quran call it, mithaq alil, then the result is divorce. We don't encourage divorce, but we believe that in some areas, sometimes when the life of a spouse is been threatened, then the divorce become a must, actually, to save life.
I look at this issue from two different perspectives. On the one hand, I could be very critical of Imams and say, why are you giving bad advice? Why are you trying to resolve problems that you have no knowledge about? I've been doing domestic violence work for so many years, and many Imams are only faced with it once they become an Imam and are not really sure what to do, and yet they still try to resolve the problem in whatever way they can. The other way of looking at it is really from the community's perspective. We have not done a good job of investing in our institutions, in our social service organizations, and in our imams. We need to come to terms with the fact that most of our community does want to seek spiritual validation with respect to any of their issues that they're going through. And if our community really wants to do that, then we as a community need to invest in our imams to have professional development training.
I think imams have a really significant role to play at multiple levels. So imams are our educators and our teachers. So simply by teaching about healthy family relationships and clarifying the misconceptions that people have about the roles between husband and wife, gender relations in general. So that could be a really important preventive measure, just that education. Imams also are often consulted when there's a crisis, when people are having difficulties. And so I think for imams to clearly label abusive behavior as abusive and to clearly label it as haram, it's actually completely prohibited to oppress another human being. And if imams can speak clearly and explicitly, labeling abuse what it is, then gradually people start to change their attitudes about it. And they come to see it for what it is, something that is very displeasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and it's unacceptable.
We have gotten so many calls. I have many personal friends who are imams who have called me in the middle of the night. They've been called to the hospital because someone has been abused, and they are completely unaware of what they need to do. They've been called, so they go. They feel they have a moral obligation to try and help, and yet they have no idea. I think that we need to really strengthen our social service organizations in our community, like Karama, who can provide adequate services to survivors. And I think that organizations like Karama need to develop relationships with imams. And so when an issue comes to an imam, they can say, I may not have the requisite experience to deal with this issue, but I know someone who can help you.
We should provide materials and literatures that are accessible to the member of our community about domestic violence and abusive relationship. And one of the ways to do that is to provide those materials in women bathrooms. So the woman can, in private, can take that material if she's going to abusive relationship. She should know where to go for help.
Many imams are doing premarital counseling, and it's an excellent opportunity to educate a new couple before they get into the relationship. Again, how they should treat each other, what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala expects from them in terms of, how to treat each other in that kind and merciful way, but also what do you do when you have conflict? Because many times people just have very limited education about how to resolve conflict, or very limited skills in managing their anger, or again resolving conflict, and they may resort to just copying what they might have seen in their own home in terms of abusive behavior. And then imams have a really important role to play in terms of accountability. So when it becomes known to them that a person is abusive, for them to hold that person accountable from a moral standpoint, and to encourage, if it's appropriate, for the victim of the abuse to seek whatever kind of help is needed, whether it's getting legal assistance, whether it's getting social services, whether it's getting housing, financial support, whatever help that the victim might need. When the imam encourages that to happen, it gives permission, basically. Because our broader community, for the most part, is not going to encourage a person to get legal help, to make a police report, or even to consult an attorney. I mean, even just very basic things could be discouraged in our community.
We should have part of our curriculum in Saturday school and Sunday school to speak about the abusive relationship and behavior. What is acceptable, what is not acceptable. From the way that people talk, talking about verbal abuse, from the physical aspect of it, what it means you hitting somebody or being physically abusive. And then we have to talk about the financial abuse, religious abuse, and so forth, all kind of it, in different levels. Maybe when you talk to small children, we can talk about respect and how to resolve conflict in a way that we can have the children to understand that concept. And then in high school, you have to speak about healthy relationship and marriage and so forth. And when in the university, definitely you have to be more clear about the sign of abuse, what to do when you are in an abusive relationship.
The way to change the narrative in the Muslim community, in a community that is very faith-based and faith-driven, is to work within the faith examples of how to deal with these issues, such as domestic violence. So the only way that we are going to change the narrative in the Muslim community is to use our history of the Prophet, peace be upon him, how his relationships were, how he treated his spouses, his children, to really further our work, which is to provide help to a marginalized part of our community. So Karama, every Domestic Violence Awareness Month, October, holds a series that we call Love Like the Prophet, peace be upon him. We find that when you go into communities and you want to jump straight to the topic of abuse and violence and problems, people are automatically on the defensive. They don't feel good about us only talking about negative issues in the community. And so we have really decided to take a positive spin on this. And the positive is to really look at models in our community, in our history of healthy marriages, healthy families, and really bring those stories to the forefront, because that is the education that is going to change the narrative.
I mean, I think that even the production of this video is a really important step, basically to promote an attitude, to promote the idea of help seeking, and that there are legitimate ways of seeking help for a particular problem. So just like if you have a medical problem, you're going to see a doctor. If you have a relationship or an emotional problem, you would seek a counselor or a social worker's help, depending on what you need. And the more that we talk about it publicly, then it becomes more normal, becomes more acceptable. And then sort of to go back to the question about the Imams, when Imams encourage people to seek help, when Imams make it clear that they work closely with counselors and social workers and other health professionals, again, that gives the message to the community that this is not only Islamically acceptable, but it is also a really good idea. It's good practice to seek help from the people that are trained to provide whatever kind of help you need. And that, to dispel the myth that people have that if we seek help, then we are struggling with our faith, we don't have good iman, we should only turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for help. But to remember that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala provided the knowledge, and He provided all of these professionals as vehicles for us to seek help, and that is part of turning to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, taking advantage and making use of whatever resources are available to us, inshallah.
The Imam have to know their limitation. The Imam are not necessarily a psychotherapist. They're not psychologists. Although we have Imam who have degree in psychology and they do counseling. And myself, I do a lot of counseling. But we have to know our limitation. We have to establish a relationship and partnerships with the professionals in the field of social services and mental health. The Imam have to know that certain cases that come to us is the cases that should be handled with professionals, and we have to create a referral system in our mosque where we can refer those people to the professionals. Now, that's number one. Number two, the Imam have to create awareness about mental health issues. And to say mental health issues are not a stigma, it's just like a person have a fever or stomachache or any other kind of physical disease, a person can have psychological, emotional disease. The Imam should not try to associate mental health with a lack of faith or lack of Iman. A person can be very religious and have mental health issues. So that we do not try to associate mental health with lack of faith. You're not mu'min enough. That's why you have depression. That's not your case at all. You can have the best pious religious person go to depressions, anxiety attack, okay? All of these are issues just like the physical issues. And again, also the Imam should provide a platform for those people who provide those services to come to speak at the mosque, so that people identify them and get to know them, and they see that the Imam trusts them, so that they can trust them as well.